Hello, my name's Gary Ford, Managing Director of Tiger Hobbies Limited, UK hobby importers and distributors. Welcome to episode 7, the history of strategic bombing, the development and the dropping of the atomic bomb. During my time in the Royal Air Force and within the supply trade, we had to store and transport equipment with radioactive sources. These of course were minor, but still had to be treated with the utmost respect. My job was to sign off on the transportation and the storage, and to do this I had to qualify as a Radiological Protection Supervisor. This entailed doing a short course with the Royal Navy for about 1 week. For someone who never did physics at school and had no idea of the periodic tables, it was a bit of an headache to grasp the very basics of atomic physics. But I got through my course and passed and found I picked up a good understanding of what was going on in the world of little bits of atoms flying all over the place. I later specialised in non-ionising radiation or microwave radiation due to my postings to Royal Air Force radar units later in my career. We also covered some of the accidents during the Manhattan Project, including, at the time, the most radiated men in history, Harry Dedlin and Louis Slotin. Accidents like this formed the basis of radiological protection supervision today, as Slotin received a fatal 10 sievert exposure during an experiment with what was known as the Demon Core. Yet the fellow scientist stood directly behind him, received a much lower dose and survived. I will cover this later in the series by using clips from a great movie called Fat Man and Little Boy. There's always been naturally occurring radiation, from strong sunlight to rocks to gases, and in the ancient Greece, Democritus proposed that all life is made up of tiny particles called atoms. But it was not until 1896 that Henry Becquerel discovered that natural uranium emitted rays, and later with Madame Curie, other radioactive elements, and thus coined the term radiation. The basic principles is the elements such as uranium and radium and such like degrade and emit energy in the form of radiation. Prior to this, in 1895, X-rays were discovered, and in 1899 Ernest Rutherford identified alpha and beta particles. He later named gamma rays after its discovery by Paul Villard in 1900. Forms of radiation were used in medical applications and even consumer products. And even by the early 1900s, the effects of health were starting to be known, and certainly proof by the early 1920s. In 1905, the world's most famous scientist, Albert Einstein, came up with E equals mc squared to describe what others hoped that elements within radiation could release massive amounts of energy. One of the first use of the words atom bomb was used by H.G. Wells in a novel in 1914. And in 1924, Churchill quoted, "One day a bomb no bigger than an orange will wipe out a city with the power of thousands of tons of TNT." And in 1920s, the term quantum and mechanical physics were used, and the scientist J. Robert Oppenheimer began studying it. In 1932, British scientist James Chadwick discovered neutrons. And in the same year, the first controlled splitting of an atom occurred when lithium atoms were split into helium atoms. Through the theory was there in 1917 by Ernest Rutherford himself in Manchester. In 1938, the Germans discovered fission by bombarding uranium with neutrons that would split and release energy, and later the same scientists coined the theory of nuclear chain reaction to describe the process. So by 1939-40, the basic theory of the atomic bomb was in place. Who would be first to the prize? In 1941, British scientist Sir James Chadwick, who discovered neutrons in 1932, helped form the Tube Alloy Project, the British Atomic Bomb Project. Basically, unfortunately for us, in sheds in Wales and Lancashire. The British found a massive problem. They knew they needed masses of uranium-235 from uranium-238 to make the bomb. But you will only get 0.7% of 99.3% of uranium-238, a natural occurring element. So it needed massive industrial infrastructure, not sheds in Wales and Lancashire. And once you get your uranium-235 and the quantity you need, you can then build your basic gun, fission bomb. But getting the large amount of uranium-235 process was not feasible at the time in the UK, so we needed a bigger friend. In the USA in the 1939, President Roosevelt got a visit from old Einstein a go-go, who stated, "The Germans advancing nuclear fission and chain reaction are going to get a bomb so vast that it could wipe out a city. You've got to do something." This started with the stockpile of uranium ore in vast amounts, and by 1940 the USA had built its first small reactor at Columbia University. And at the same time, the UK offered the USA all its research from its sheds in Wales and Lancashire. By 1941, the USA had isolated plutonium-239 for the first time, a nasty isotope with an half-life of some 24,000 years. And you do not need as much to make a bomb, but it's far more technical to make. So, by the end of 1941, a combined atomic bomb project between the USA and the UK had been agreed. But in the USA, far away from the Germans and Japanese. By August 1942, the US Army was given control of the project due to their Corps of Engineers' expertise in building big project or constructional projects. Under the command of General Leslie Groves from the US Army's Manhattan Engineering District, the project was born. Groves was not the most senior officer and promoted to Brigadier General, coming off building the Pentagon, and was just the no-bull officer it needed, and he would rule this project with an iron fist. A massive processing plant will needed to be built, and this was built at Oak Ridge, Tennessee. The British thought 22 kilograms of uranium-235 would be needed for a bomb that could be carried by a British bomber, and that could have been the Lancaster. The USA reckoned they would need 65 kilograms, and that would need thousands of tons of uranium ore to get that amount of uranium-235 processed. They would also build a reactor at Hanford, Washington State in the northwest of the USA to produce the plutonium-239, and finally a laboratory where the scientists could suss all this out. And, of course, a boffin in charge. General Groves picked a maverick and slightly risky due to his past connections with communism and his fine judge of ladies, not. But J. Robert Oppenheimer was well organised and knew the importance of security and made sure that this was stamped down hard on the heads of every single boffin of the project. Oppenheimer also had a good idea for the site of the top secret laboratory, far away from prying eyes. This was Los Alamos in New Mexico. So this would be a massive and costly project, and the choice of building an easier gun fission bomb required vast amounts of industrial infrastructure to produce these 65 kilograms of uranium-235 or a plutonium implosion weapon with only 6 kilograms of plutonium-239 and the potential of a higher yield of explosive, but highly technical with explosive lens requirement of extreme tolerance. In the gun fission system, an amount of uranium-235 is basically shot down a gun barrel by explosive clash with another lump of uranium-235 and some neutron initiators, and you're going to get a chain reaction. The other one requires shaped charges surrounding a core of uranium-239 and then set off, causing an implosive crush like this to create the chain reaction. They had a good idea that the gun fission system would work, but the other one, well, that needed testing. So the Manhattan Project would be expensive, around about $1.9 billion. But like all nukes, that includes the nukes of today, it's never been about the bomb. It's always about the delivery system. And its delivery system, the Boeing B-29 Superfortress, will cost over $3 billion to develop and build. As stated earlier in the series, the B-29 was on the drawing boards in the late 1930s as a super long-range bomber. But it was having mega development problems. And also the B-32 Dominator, well, that wasn't going too well either. So an alternative bomber needed to be found, something that could carry at least a 10-ton bomb. One of the US AAF's early consideration was, of course, the Avro Lancaster bomber seen here, the only aircraft capable of carrying a 10-ton bomb with a massive bomb bay. How far this went, no one really knows, and the UK MOD have never released information about this. But by the end of 1943, there was no more talks of using Avro Lancasters. By 1944, many of the problems with B-29 had been sorted, though it still had some engine problems and needed to be modified to take the weapons. So a new secret unit would be needed to be formed, and it would need one hell of a pilot to lead it. This would be Colonel Paul Tibbets, leader of the very first 8th Bomber Command B-17 raid over France in 1942, and now were the most experienced pilots of heavy bombers, and had more stick time on the B-29 than any other pilot, and led the testing after the chief test pilot, Edward T. Allen, had been killed. In testing, he proved at 30,000 feet, this aircraft, the B-29, could turn tighter than this aircraft, the P-47 fighter, which would be useful when trying to get away from an exploding atom bomb. He was also a trusted officer as well, because he'd been earlier flying around VIPs, including Eisenhower, thus he was known in higher circles. And it was Groves who chose Tibbets to lead the 509th Composite Group in September 1944. The 509th Composite Group was activated in late 1944, was not to be known as a bomb group for security reasons. It also flew transport aircraft such as C-47 Skytrains and C-54 Skymasters as part of its operational process. 80% of all potential crews, both air and ground crews, were rejected, and only the very best would make it to the unit. Any requirement for the Manhattan Project would be codenamed Silverplate, including the B-29s. And these requirements are a series of modifications on the bomb base to take the two types of bombs. And testing with these bombs of the same shape would take place throughout 1944. And further modifications had to be done, including the use of Avro Lancaster tall boy release systems on the B-29. And in the end, some 60 or so of the B-29s will be modified during and after the war. So at least some of the good old Avro Lancaster made it on an atomic bomb mission. After nearly 2 years of solid work, the Manhattan Project was ready and to test its weapon, the P-239 implosion system. This was just the inner part of the bomb, not the casing, and was hoisted up on a tower in the New Mexico desert, the place was Alamogordo, near the White Sands test area, codenamed Trinity. They built a camp near the test area, but this was accidentally bombed twice, with aircraft on the Rangers missing the target. The secret camp was lit up and no one told the other aircraft on the Rangers, and I'm sure they fixed this before the gadget, as it was known, was brought to the area. The test was due to be carried out at 0400 hours on the 16th of July 1945, but heavy rain delayed the test for over 1 hour. Then at 0529, the weapon exploded with a force of 24.8 kilotons. They expected between 5 and 10 kilotons. Kind of shocking to most of them. Everyone there was in shock and amazement at the power of this weapon. Some cried, others whooped, and one stated, "My God, we're all sons of bitches now." Oppenheimer thought of scripts from the Hindu holy books, thinking, not actually saying. He later changed his thoughts to another Hindu script. "Now I've become death, the destroyer of worlds." The genie was now out of the bottle, and they needed to keep this under wraps. A passing US Navy cargo plane, some 30 miles away, radioed the reports of the explosion, like the sun coming up strong and early in a flash. They were told to button it and don't attempt to fly south. With the 509th Composite Group now trained and equipped with the required number of Silverplate B-29 Superfortresses, it will be given orders to go to Tinian with 225 officers and 1,500 enlisted men. With the amount of secrecy with the move, there's always some senior nosy Parker and at least 2 senior officers had Colt 45 pistols stuck in their chest as they tried to inspect passing Silverplate B-29. And in one instance, a C-54 carrying a plutonium core for the later bomb with one passenger was tried to be requisitioned by a senior Air Force officer, only to have another Colt 45 rammed into his chest saying, "Sir, you're not senior enough." To get the rest of the now code-named Little Boy gun fishing bomb to Tinian, it was sailed on the USS Indianapolis cruiser from San Francisco on the 16th of July 1945 via Hawaii, delivering its cargo on the 26th of July 1945 to Tinian. Again, due to the secrecy surrounding the movements of the USS Indianapolis, procedures for leaving and arriving at port may have not been followed. So when IJN submarine I-58 hit it with 2 torpedoes, the ship sank in just 12 minutes with no distress call. This and all the secrecy surrounding the ship's movements may have caused delay in getting to the ship's survivors, resulting in only 300 or so at the crew of 1,200 getting picked up, including many attacked by sharks. This thing was known as the Ship of Sharks. But on the 5th of August 1945, Colonel Paul Tibbets took command of B-29, commanded by Major Robert Lewis, and had it painted with the name of his mother, Enola Gay, of which Lewis, was none too happy. Early on the 6th of August 1945, Enola Gay, with two other B-29s, the Great Artiste and the Necessary Evil, took off from Tinian North Airfield. One B-29 was used for instrumentation and the other one to take pictures of the raid. While on the way to the primary target, Hiroshima, US Navy weapons expert Captain Deke Parsons armed the bomb, and his assistant, Lieutenant Jepson, removed the safety devices about 30 minutes from the target, with Enola Gay flying at 32,000 feet. I am showing a short clip from the 1980 movie Enola Gay, The Men and the Mission, that is found on YouTube and covers well the putting together and the mission of the 509 composite group commanded by Paul Tibbets, and he's played by Patrick Duffy, he of Dallas and Bobby Ewing fame, and he bears a great resemblance to the real Paul Tibbets. The Enola Gay's bomb aimer, Major Thomas Freeby, who had flown previously with Tibbets, started the bomb run over the city of Hiroshima, which had been given the green light with decent weather and a view of the aiming point. Tibbets ordered the crew, all the crew other than Lieutenant Jacob Beza, doing the radio countermeasures, and Freeby to don dark goggles. Using the Norton M9 bomb sight, Freeby released Little Boy at 08:15. The weapon took about 1 minute to fall the 30,000 feet. As soon as the weapon left the aircraft, Tibbets put the aircraft into a really tight turn to get away from the explosion, which happened at about 2,000 foot from the surface and approximately 500 feet from the aiming point. The resulting explosion was estimated to be 15 kilotons. That's 15,000 tons equivalent, just 34 years after the very first bombing mission in 1911, and in an aircraft that could not fly higher than 3,000 foot and at 75 miles an hour, and dropped only, 50 pounds of bombs. Destruction on the ground was almost total, with some 70 or 80,000 people being killed instantly. 70% of the buildings were destroyed, all from just 1.7% of the fission material reacting. That's all the energy from not even the size of a penny. Remember, uranium is very dense and heavy. Enola Gay returned to Tinian at just before 3 p.m. on the 6th of August to celebrations and immediate award for his leadership to Tibbets. President Truman issued a statement. They have used a new and powerful weapon on Japan. If they did not accept surrender terms, a rain of fire will come down from the skies. The Japanese nuclear scientists confirmed to the Japanese leadership on the 7th of August it had been a nuclear weapon, but deemed that the USA had only 1 or 2 more bombs left. The Japanese leadership thought, sod it, we'll fight on. But just after midnight on the 9th of August 1945, hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops, thousands of tanks and massed artillery entered the war against Japan. And the USSR had officially declared war on Japan. Later on the 9th, another B-29 called Boxcar, commanded by Major Charles Sweeney, dropped a P-239 implosion weapon called Fat Man on Nagasaki. On Boxcar was Lieutenant Beza doing the same job, and also Enola Gay flew as the weather and recce area over the primary target, Kokura, which was the primary target but was covered by weather. On one of the aircraft on this mission, called Big Stink, an observer was no other than Group Captain Leonard Cheshire. Unlike the first mission, this one went wrong in many, many ways, including wasting time over Kokura due to bad weather. This wasted fuel, and Boxcar had got its own fuel problems. So they headed to the secondary target, Nagasaki, where they found a break in the clouds and dropped their bomb, Fat Man, at 11 a.m. The explosion was stated to be 21 kilotons and oddly exploded directly over the factory that built the torpedoes used at Pearl Harbor. Some of the city was protected by hills, hence the destruction was not as severe as Hiroshima, but still an estimated 39 to 40,000 were killed instantly. Cheshire, who'd observed the bomb initially from about 160 miles away, then closer as Big Stink flew at speed to get over to the target area, was deeply moved, and it almost drove him to a nervous breakdown. And he was totally shocked at the destruction. A number of Allied powers were killed in Nagasaki, including RAF Corporal Ronald Shaw. 24 Australians survived, who I think were down a coal mine at the time. Boxcar, running low on fuel, could not get back to Tinian or to even Iwo Jima, so had to divert to Okinawa, with no welcome, unlike Enola Gay. Basically, receiving crews at Okinawa, who the hell are you and where do you come from? The USA had planned other attacks if Japan did not surrender, with the next bomb being ready by the 18th of August and 3 more 239 weapons in September and 3 more 239 weapons in October. The easier to build but difficult with industrial capacity to get another 65 kilograms of uranium-235 would not be ready until December. Japan was ready to stop fighting on the 10th. Not only the atomic bomb, but their army being smashed by the Soviets. So on the 14th of August 1945, Emperor Hirohito, heard for the very first time by his people as a living god, stated, well, the war's not going really in our favour. He never mentioned the word surrender. But on the 2nd of September 1945, the Japanese officially signed the document of surrender on the battleship USS Missouri under General MacArthur. The most destructive war in human history had ended, with the deaths of maybe 60 million people. Before we leave this episode, I thought I would look at briefly the 2 radiation accidents that happened at Los Alamos in 1945 and 1946, with the 3rd P-239 Corps, nicknamed the Demon Corps. I'm going to be showing a clip from a great 1989 movie called Fat Man and Little Boy, with Paul Newman as General Leslie Groves, showing the experiment with actor John Cusack, who plays a composite character based on both Deadland and Slotin. In late August 1945, scientist Harry Deadland was building a neutron reflector around a core using tungsten bricks. The core may have been radioactive, but it was fairly stable and certainly not critical or even subcritical, and it was not going to go bang. But you can get it to go subcritical by reflecting the neutrons against reflective materials such as tungsten, carbide, graphite, beryllium, steel or gold. So he was building a reflector thing when he dropped one of the tungsten bricks onto the core and got radiated with 5 sieverts of neutron radiation. He died about 25 days later. So you'd think one accident would be enough, but in May 1946, using the same Demon Core, Canadian physicist Louis Slotin did a more dangerous experiment. This time using a beryllium sphere to cover the Demon Core, and used a flat-headed screwdriver to lower the 2 spheres, literally like this, to reflect the neutrons to get closer from subcritical to critical. He was a bit slack and some say full of bravado, and on this occasion may not have used the safety shims that would stop the sphere closing totally and would cause basically the start of a nuclear explosion. With others in the room and one man stood right behind him, he used a screwdriver to get close to critical mass. Slotin had done this before, and others warning, you are really tickling the dragon's tail, when someone dropped a cup of coffee or certainly distracted him and the screwdriver slipped out of his hands. In a split second, the sphere completely closed. And that gave a blue flash as it went from subcritical to critical and pumped out a massive burst of radiation. There was a blue flash, as mentioned, and Slotin, as ionizing radiation burst out, opened the sphere with a screwdriver and stopped the criticality, but got 10 sieverts of radiation and stated, I'm dead. Slotin was dead within 10 days and nothing the doctors could do for him. Others in the room, including the man stood right behind him, all survived with various radioactive injuries and doses. Even straight after the experiment went wrong, he was writing stuff down on the boards and making notes. Where the people were standing in the lab, he later helped with radiological protection supervision and what doses you could take and survive or keep going for a while. It can be quite brutal in a war, of course.
Everybody should make it. Except me. I'm dead.
In the next episode, I will look at strategic bombing in the post-war period, including the most destructive bombing campaign in history as far as people killed. That's more than against Japan, Germany and all the other bombing in history. The forgotten horror over North Korea.